Good evening, viewers, and welcome to a very special episode of The Angry Astronaut. We are joined from two of the principal researchers who are involved in a study that I featured in a piece of content released only a few days ago. Really happy to have you gentlemen with us here today. Would you be so kind as to introduce yourselves to the viewers?
Yes, sure. My name is John Tedesco. I'm a laboratory engineer, retired recently, and spent most of my career working in a laboratory in instrumentation and setting up different parameters for testing, safety testing. My background is in electronics engineering. I have a master's degree in it, and this is something that I've been doing most of my career.
And I'll introduce myself. I'm Jerry Tedesco. I'm also an engineer. I come from a diverse background. I actually started in public health. I have two bachelor's degrees, one in public health, and I focused on worked in forensic science. Actually, I used to work for the Office of the Medical Examiner in Suffolk County, New York. I worked in their forensic science division. So I did that for 2 years. I switched over to go into engineering, and I worked in the defense sector for most of my life. Mainly in an area called RISDA, which is Reconnaissance, Surveillance, and Target Acquisition Center Systems. So I've also now work in aerospace. I've worked in aviation, but my engineering background is a mixed bag. It's mechanical, quality assurance, and some architectural engineering.
Well, you gentlemen seem to have a different background than people who have dedicated their lives to searching for UFOs. That's the more famous people we can think of in regards to that. So tell me, how do you make the leap from doing what you gentlemen have done in the past to a research study that I gather lasted close to a year, looking for UAPs off the coast of Long Island?
Sure. Well, this has been an interest we've had for many years, even as kids. In our background, there was always an interest in space and technology, and UFOs were part of that interest. Of course, the mainstream television programs that you can search of and that sort of thing we follow very closely, and having some background as far as seeing some stuff out here on the island, which is interesting. Some unusual stuff, and Long Island is kind of a hotspot too of sightings and anomalous stuff that seems to occur on somewhat of a regular basis.
So it turned out to be a pretty good spot to set up shop, so to speak.
Yes, and this is we've had conversations with some of the fighter pilots. One in particular, Ryan Graves. We had talked to him regarding his experiences, which occurred generally 10 miles off the shore from Jacksonville up to Virginia Beach, and they've had these occurrences of these polyhedrons. I guess in spheroids is how he described it, and it's very similar to what we've been seeing out here on the island, size-wise and their presentation.
So can you tell me, in regards to the, just kind of diving straight into the meat of this study and what you guys saw? I mean, the viewers have already seen a lot of the footage that you took. What sort of steps did you take to make sure that what you were observing was not, misidentified drones, misidentified commercial aircraft, or Chinese lanterns, floating around after a festival or something? What did you guys do to ensure that you weren't going to misidentify those sorts of, commonly mistaken objects?
Sure. Well, our idea was to set up a methodical approach that would follow forensic engineering principles. We would assess the scene. We would do a survey of all the background noise that which would be aircraft, biomass, birds, bats, balloons, if there's any drone flights, you name it, kites, anything like that. And what we did is we set up a protocol to eliminate the prosaics first. And we realized we needed a full system to do that. We needed a hyperspectral system of cameras. We needed radar. We need definitely active radar. And what we would do is we use the radar for detection of objects in the sky. We would use the hyperspectral cameras to be able to see those same objects.
Yes, to identify them.
Yeah.
And in fact, that was a large part of the study, was the eliminating prosaics.
Mm-hmm.
We spent quite a bit of time observing aircraft. We're close to 3 different airports out there. One of the major airports is JFK, John F. Kennedy Airport, and we would watch the flight patterns. We would, look at the arrivals, the departures. We would look at, planes that were in the glide slopes, and we'd look at their taxi lights, their running lights, and study them very carefully. We also determined methods of identifying them, which was of course, radar was very effective. And we also used hyperspectral cameras and high zoom cameras that we could zoom out, get that magnification, look at the fuselage of the aircraft, identify the navigation lights. Even something that was a pinpoint in the sky. We could get close enough that we could identify those features. We have. That also involved quite a bit of an expense. We ended up with FLIR cameras, forward-looking infrared, and we wanted a camera that had an optical zoom system, not just digital. So that we could look further enough out and look at those the thermal effects of the fuselage of the aircraft, be able to identify the engines, the heat from the engines. So these things were necessary. And once we were able to identify it, then we started looking for the unusual stuff that didn't fit neatly into the prosaic pie. There was a lot of stuff that we saw out there, and some of it can fool you. And early on, we were fooled by some of the strobe lights and so forth on the aircraft that can have a visible appearance, and then some of it can actually give you some infrared radiation coming off of it. But we knew what the wavelength was. We knew what the cutoffs were. We used IR cutoff filters, and we used UV filters in order to identify that. But again, like I said, like Gerald said, it's we used a lot of hyperspectral cameras, and those cameras were UV. We have so we're going from 2 ends of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're going down as far as 160 nanometers. So we're looking at the UVC band from 160 to 200. We have binary detectors for that, very sensitive detectors, and these are used by people fighting fires. At 28,000 feet, you could see a campfire. And identify it with the UV radiation that it gives off. The sensors, we're using some of those sensors. We also have used UVB, UVA. We're looking at the visible light spectrum with the night vision cameras, color night vision cameras, which is our newest addition. And we have near infrared as well as shortwave infrared. So we're moving into the shortwave band. So we take that up almost to 1900 nanometers. And then above and beyond that is the long wave, which is is 8 microns up to 15. So we're looking at quite a huge stretch of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're also looking at ionizing radiation as well, alpha, beta, gamma, X-ray, and so forth. So we're looking at quite a bit of stuff, and we have specialized instrumentation to do. We try to tie everything up into spectrum analyzers because of their dynamic range. We want to look at the smallest signals in the noise floor, and as well as some of the larger signals that can literally overload a system. So we want to look at the whole envelope from one end of the spectrum to the other, one end of the amplitude level to the other. Right, like I said, right down into the noise floor. And this was very important to us. We have acoustic measuring devices with a parabolic dish. We also have infrasound, very low frequencies that we're using accelerometers for. So there's a lot of things that we're looking for, we're measuring, and we're always changing. We're always updating the equipment to address our needs. And fortunately enough, we were able to secure some money, to keep that going, because equipment is very expensive, especially the equipment that has the tolerance ranges and the accuracy that we need.
So tell me, in terms of the things that you did see, how often were you able to also track them on radar? And also, according to your study, the vast majority of them were not actually visible with the naked eye. How much of a percentage, roughly, would you say, of the objects that you saw, studied, etc., were outside the visible spectrum? So, number one, how often were you able to track them? What sort of performance did you see on the part of these objects? What did they do that was unusual or anomalous? And also, how often were they infrared or not visible?
Well, as far as the radar for detection, these objects they were intermittent. As targets, they were intermittent, and they would never stay in one place. They would pop in and out almost like fireflies. So it made it difficult to actually track exact movements of where they were. But they did show up in the hyperspectral cameras. We would see them with hyperspectral devices. Right. That would correlate with it.
Yeah. And radar, was difficult in order to qualify that as, Gerald says they act like fireflies. As their presentation, that's where they would appear on the display. The reflective characteristics were difficult to follow. We had to use echo trails in order to see patterns, because they were so intermittent. So there were times that they presented, other times they wouldn't present at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we were certainly able to see, if we were looking at ships out on the water, on the ocean, we could certainly see the ships out there. We could see the commercial air traffic as well. So it was easy to differentiate between one and the other. If the objects were smaller, we would use again the thermal cameras, the high magnification thermals, and some of the hyperspectral, the infrared cameras that we could look at that had that kind of sensitivity. These things would even if you were down to 1 millilux worth of lighting out there, you could certainly resolve a lot of the stuff that you were looking at under those conditions, and that's improved over the years too. I mean, we used a lot of this equipment with Sony sensors, Starburst sensors, they're night vision sensors, planetary type cameras. And these sensors were typically the IMX 462, 464. The smaller is the 462, larger was the 464. And we extended that to the IMX 991. People are familiar with it, know how sensitive these sensors are. The 991 will take you up to 2,500 nanometers. So you could certainly get into the shortwave infrared as well. Very, very sensitive, cameras. But this is, like I said, this is some of the stuff that we've invested in. We needed the sensitivity, and we looked at certain manufacturers and certain technologies in order to do that, in order to identify, some of the stuff that was above and beyond the prosaics.
Yeah, and some of the things that you were talking about, these objects, how they present themselves. And behaviors and properties. Normally, we would see the highest percentage of these objects that appeared as spherical. They were spherical. They orb-like objects. Their luminosity would change from high to low luminosity. When they would drop off to low luminosity, they looked like they had a structure in it. It appeared to us to look like a polyhedral structure, multi-sided, flat-faced sides. Also still kind of spherical. Some of them cube-like, and they would usually would show rotation.
Always with rotation.
With a rotation.
Yes.
They would appear randomly at different times. It would be 1 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning. But it would show up. It may show up 1 or 2 here. Sometimes it would be a cluster of them. Sometimes it would be paired. They show up as paired, and they would alternate luminosity as a pair.
Right, and then some of it would show up, even similar, very similar to what you'd see, a constellation, or the, like most people, they seem to confuse the planet Venus with something that may be anomalous because of the brightness of the planet and so forth. But these constellations, they're not static. They're always moving, and we have fixed camera systems on the RV, and we have a large display monitor in there. And what we'll do is we'll use dry erase markers. We'll actually circle those objects just to see how they present and how long will they stay in one position. And we've seen objects that appear to be stars, almost like pseudo-stars, and they would remain stationary while the rest of the constellation would move. So of course, that would raise a lot of suspicion, and we'd analyze that, with the cameras and focus on those particular oddities. Again, this is these objects would they could appear very stationary for long periods of time, or they could suddenly move with high velocities, and we've seen that. You've seen objects that would literally, drop from the atmosphere, drop from the cloud layers down to the water. We've observed that too. The percentage-wise, I would say that overall, I would say probably about 70% of what we saw was in the was not visible. Was in the non-visible spectrum. And possibly even higher than that. It was very difficult to see. I mean, there were times that they presented themselves as a bright, luminous object, but most of the time it was very difficult to see. You'd see occasional glinting, you'd see occasional movement, then they would just disappear, but never really disappear. You'd see it in the infrared. We'd catch it on a hyperspectral camera. So we'll see that change.
Now, the viewers are watching right now, and I'm not sure how well you can recall all the footage that you took, but in this case, you film a number of different objects that are hovering over the ocean, and you appear to be using, this is the only piece of footage where you're doing this, you appear to be using some sort of LiDAR sensor, something to determine range. Do you know what footage I'm talking about here? What were the characteristics of these objects, just as an example of the footage that you took? Were these visible, or were they only visible to your equipment? And I can see that you're using the LiDAR here on all of them. Do you have an estimated size, and also the behavior too? Did you get an impression that these were intelligently directed objects, or is this some sort of phenomena of nature that's just occurring, whenever the chemistry and the electricity is right, and we just don't understand the phenomena yet?
That's the interesting question. There were times they would appear random and purposeless, to meander along the shoreline. Other times they would show a purpose and awareness of us. They would appear directly in front of our vehicle. They would react to the LiDAR beam, and sometimes moving out of the way.
Absolutely.
Wow, okay.
The other thing is they would suddenly appear and disappear. Now, our opinion is that they may not be disappearing. They might be changing a spectral red wavelength.
Right, some kind of signature management.
Yeah.
Taking place.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. Quite a few times too. It's while observing them. We'll look and we'll see some visible activity. The luminous level will drop out suddenly, and then we'll see it in another camera. We'll see it in the hyperspectral cameras, in the infrared. So they're not actually disappearing, not actually going anywhere. But then there are times that we'll see it disappear from the higher order infrared range too. Anything that's over 1100 nanometers. Into the sphere, into the shortwave infrared. I don't think the one thing that we haven't seen, which is kind of interesting, is that we haven't seen them present with any kind of a thermal signature in the long wave infrared, which is odd. We've seen these objects on the water, and we see no different. There's no differential between the background temperature, the environmental temperature, and the object itself. Which is highly unusual.
Yeah.
Because we had Well, we tried to use a FLIR camera to see if we could see structure, if there was some kind of structure with a light on it. But the only thing we would see is that sphere of light. We couldn't see any structure. There was no thermal deviation. It was maybe it could have been an object that was matching the background temperature, and maybe that's why we didn't see it. But we never saw a structure with a FLIR camera.
Right, right. And it would have to match the background. I mean, that's the only way that you wouldn't be able to differentiate it. Even some kind of a contour, or something surrounding the object that was at a different temperature range. Like I said, this is something that is very unusual, and we've seen a lot of different objects. Of course, looking at commercial aircraft and that sort of thing. It's for something like that, it would have to match. Doing some kind of signature monitoring to have to match the background temperature in order to not be able to be visible on a long-wave thermal.
And that's what made these things so strange. Is with typical air traffic, I mean, they have all the normal signatures we would spot, from thermal signature to visible lighting to the discernible navigation lighting. These things were very different. It would just be the sphere of light. Of course, they would be mostly in the infrared. There was most of the time there's no visible light, or only seen when they occasionally would increase their luminosity. We might be able to see them visibly.
Right, right, and everything has a thermal footprint. Yeah. It's even if it's a fraction of a degree difference.
Yes.
This should be something that we see there, and the sensitivity of the cameras, the camera that we have, would be very, very unusual not to see that.
What about electromagnetic? Any electromagnetic fields?
Yes. So we're monitoring the electromagnetic fields. We're looking at the E fields, H fields. We have RF spectrum analyzers that we're looking up the frequency anywhere between 100 kilohertz on up to almost 30 gigahertz. So we're monitoring quite a range of the RF. We have seen some anomalies. That's something we need to explore further. Unfortunately, you have a lot of communications going on. You have 5G towers that are putting out these block signals, and they're very difficult, to kind of isolate those envelopes, especially at those amplitude levels, So it's we'll look at stuff and during observations where we're seeing multiple objects at the same time. There does seem to be some kind of an outlier in there. Frequencies typically at 1.79 gigahertz. We'll see it at 4.1 gigahertz and 2.9, which is kind of unusual. We'll also see something that's just above 10, almost 11 gigahertz, 10.9 gigahertz. Again, this is something that we need to explore further. It's not. We're not working under laboratory conditions out there. And of course, you have high EMI. You have high EMI content. And it's to try to isolate that. During these points of higher activity.
Right.
Sometimes can be very difficult.
The other interesting thing is some of these outliers that John is talking about. We do find some correlations with ultrasonics. We do pick up we get these ultrasonic signals over the water. If we turn that parabolic dish away from the water, then those signals drop off. So it looks like the directionality is from the water. Something we're wondering is if the water could be acting as some kind of medium for ultrasonic signals. Ultrasonic signals couldn't travel far because they would attenuate due to the air around the area. But it was interesting is that right near the water, the only medium to carry them is the water.
Yeah. So the water is your conductive source, and it's the ultrasonic antennas that we're using. We're literally about 106 meters from the water's edge, and it's very directional. We have to be facing the ocean in order to receive these signals, and we have to be using a spectrum analyzer, a dynamic spectrum analyzer, that we're picking up these signals because some of them are very low, but they have a very interesting pattern to them, and they correlate to some of the magnetic fields that we're measuring as well.
Really?
There's a correlation between the electric and magnetic fields as well as the acoustic.
Wow.
We're seeing 40 kilohertz blocks from 100 kilohertz on up to 1 megahertz, and that's the range we're measuring, and probably even further than that. The spectrum analyzer that we're using is capable of up to 1 megahertz on the acoustic spectrum. But we are seeing very defined 40 kilohertz block, look like a comb. If you look at the side of a comb, that's what it looks like, those frequencies. And the amplitudes are not decreasing like harmonics in amplitude. They are actually increasing. They're increasing up to 1 megahertz, possibly even higher. So that's highly unusual activity. We've also presented this to Tim Gallaudet, who's works with, of course, with NOAA, and is very familiar with ultrasonics and some of the ship communications in the sonar range. And he said it's nothing. He basically described it as nothing that he's ever seen. So it's kind of unusual.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. We are starting to run a little short on time, so I've got 2 remaining questions. Firstly, you mentioned incidents or an incident where these things appeared in front of your vehicle. Can you tell me about one of these experiences and how you reacted to it? I mean, that would have shocked me. So tell me about one of these experiences where they seem to just suddenly present right in front of your vehicle. Tell me about that, please.
We had an interesting night in February that John and I went out, and it was about the 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. As we had we watched on. We had a central monitor that uses IR vision. And we saw a luminous sphere sitting on top. It looked like sitting on top of the water. And it appeared directly in front of us. And what we did is we took our portable IR cameras out. We went to the shoreline to find out what it was, and it was this the sort of spherical object that was sitting just feet above the water, rotating and changing its luminosity back and forth in cycles.
Roughly between 4 and 8 feet from the water surface.
Yes.
And it was about 600 meters out from the edge of the beach.
It was actually casting a reflection of itself on the water surface.
Right, and it had rotation. That was and this occurred twice. This occurred twice on us. As we pulled up, early morning hours is that it would present itself. Then there was another incident back in August of 2022, where we saw a triangle out there, and the triangle was only visible on the main monitor within the RV. The main monitor is using a shortwave infrared system, and we were able to see it from the near infrared and in the low end of the shortwave infrared. Very bright, very luminous. Nothing visibly that we could see, nothing with our eyes. And Gerald and I had taken some portable hyperspectral cameras down with us, down to the water's edge. And this triangle, that night it was, we'll say that the wind, we had 35-mile-an-hour wind gusts. And this object, it looked like 3 separate objects in this triangular formation that were extremely stable out there. The object was roughly about, I would say, about 30 feet from the surface of the water. And what we tried to do was take an infrared illuminator, an emitter, and try to paint it back and forth, try to highlight the object. And we were able to get reflection from it. We were able to, reflect the surface of that object and be able to see it. So we knew it couldn't have been any more than maybe 1,400 feet away from us at that point.
The other interesting thing is these 3 objects, we think they were 3 separate spherical objects. They were absolutely fixed in that position with 35-mile-per-hour winds, but they also made absolutely no sound.
No sound.
And we actually have, it remained in that spot for about 45 minutes.
45 minutes, yep.
And we had four of us there, all 4 researchers. None of us could see it in the visible with our eyes, but all 4 of us were able to see it in the infrared.
Wow.
Using the camera equipment.
And the last question that I have for you in regards to, and believe me, I could sit here all night and talk to you guys, so I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening. As far as the last piece of footage, which the viewers are watching right now, which I think you guys will know what I'm talking about, the object that ascends up to the clouds and appears to meet with another light up. Tell me something about that, because that is, I mean, if you know that that is nothing mundane, if you know that has to be something unusual, that is one of the most compelling pieces of footage I've ever seen. Please tell me about that experience.
Sure. So this occurred around 2 o'clock in the morning. This was 2 a.m. What we had noticed is an object that seemed to have seemed to be a polyhedral object rotating. And caught our eyes. It had a kaleidoscope type effect to it. After watching it for several minutes, we realized that the object was making a turn up to the zenith, going straight up to the cloud layers. We saw another a light source that was starting to show itself up above the cloud layer. And it looked like a second object. It looked like a second object that was coming down from the cloud layer. The two objects, we went frame by frame to look at this very closely, to analyze it. And it almost looked like the object that you see moving across your field of view from left to right synchronized its rotation and in a cohesion mode with the other object. And we could see this object moving as one mass together. So you had twice the illumination and twice the size, and then both objects just moved up into the cloud layers. And very, very, very unusual, very, very unusual. And we believe that they actually did come in contact at that point.
Well, I'll tell you something. It's clear to me you guys have done your homework. You've really put obviously a considerable amount of effort into studying the UAP phenomena in a very comprehensive and responsible way. I want to thank you for the efforts that you put into this. I'll do everything I can to promote your study, because I think it's definitely something that needs to be explored further without coming to any sorts of conclusions about what we saw here. It's something that definitely needs to be looked into further. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you for inviting us on.
Thank you.
So as I've said a number of times throughout the history of my channel, one of the reasons that I've held off on reporting on UFOs, until recently anyway, is because of a lack of tangible proof. I was comfortable in reporting on things like Oumuamua and other astronomical phenomena because we could confirm the existence of objects like this with our most advanced telescopes. But now, in my opinion, we have the tangible proof. We are talking about objects that remain motionless and also completely silent in strong winds over the ocean, objects capable of an impressive climb rate when they want to anyway, and objects that don't radiate heat. I can't think of any natural phenomena or mundane commercial aircraft or device that could mirror the performance of what we've seen in this footage and what these researchers studied over the 10 months that they were in this region of Long Island. And if these are military drones of some kind, if the Chinese or the Russians have deployed these highly sophisticated devices just over the Atlantic Ocean, perhaps to spy on air traffic in the area, then why would they just hang around when they knew that they were being observed by researchers who have advanced surveillance equipment at their disposal? In my mind, this would completely blow an entire espionage operation for no good reason. And for the same reason, I believe that these are not experimental aircraft being operated by the United States either, because they would vacate the area for the same reason if they knew they were under observation by advanced surveillance equipment. In my opinion, we're dealing with something far more significant than this. And for the first time, I can really honestly say that I'm convinced, and whatever a believer might be, I've become one. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon so I can keep bringing this content to you. And as always, stay angry about space.